The train hissed to a halt, brakes shrieking like wounded animals against steel. Doors clanged open with a jarring bang, and the dry Nebraska wind blew dust across the prairie, blinding and relentless. A moment of silence followed, as though even the land itself held its breath. Then, one by one, the boots came down, hard, slow, uncertain. 43 German prisoners of war stepped onto American soil, their eyes narrow beneath sunburnt brows, their bodies stiff from days of confinement and the weight of uncertainty. Corporal Dietrich Voss was the fifth man off the transport. He squinted against the light, his jaw clenched. The gravel crunched beneath his boots like brittle bones. His back ached from the long ride, but he didn't flinch. Pride held him upright. A former baker from Hamburg who had turned panzer mechanic, Dietrich carried with him more than fatigue. He carried skepticism, calculation, and the unspoken obligation to appear unbroken. Ahead stood a row of whitewashed barracks, squat and dull in the heat. Barbed wire gleamed faintly under the high sun, though it sagged in places, more suggestive of boundary than menace. American guards leaned casually against wooden posts, rifles slung over their shoulders as if part of a costume rather than tools of enforcement. They weren't barking orders. They weren't even looking angry. One of them yawned. "This isn't a prison," murmured the man behind Dietrich, a lanky infantryman with a crooked nose. "It's a farm." Dietrich didn't answer, but his eyes swept the area with mechanical precision. He noted the absence of towers, the relaxed posture of the guards, the oddly peaceful air. It was disarming, and that, in itself, was cause for suspicion. In war, kindness without reason was never innocent. A dull clang echoed behind them as the train doors closed again. The moment of arrival had passed. Now they were inside something new. They were led, single file, toward the administrative building where a stocky American officer read names from a clipboard. Roll call was mechanical, impersonal, and when finished they were waved toward a narrow gravel path. It led past garden plots, clotheslines, and a small chapel with a crooked steeple. Everything felt too quiet, too clean. Inside the camp's mess hall, long tables lined the space, flanked by benches scrubbed pale from overuse. Tin trays sat neatly in rows, each one containing a triangle of white bread, a scoop of what appeared to be mashed potatoes, and a cold, pale lump in a dented cup. Dietrich stared at it. It didn't melt. It didn't move. "What is this?" asked a voice to his left. A young guard, perhaps no older than 20, grinned through a toothpick. "Tell him it's ice cream." The prisoners exchanged wary glances. Ice cream? In the middle of a war? In a prison camp? Dietrich picked up the cup, held it to his nose, and sniffed. It had no smell, no texture he recognized. He tapped it with his spoon. The surface gave slightly, resisting with a soft, rubbery firmness. He scraped a small layer off the top, watery and pale, and stared at it without tasting. "Looks like frozen soap," he said flatly. A few men chuckled under their breath, but it was not humor, it was warning. Mockery was safer than confusion. Mockery meant you were still above it. The tall man with the crooked nose leaned in. "What if it is soap?" They could mix anything in that. Powder, bleach, something slow. "They don't kill you with bullets here," another muttered. "They kill you with comfort." Dietrich set the cup down without touching it again. Across the hall, the American guard leaned back in his chair, chewing slowly on his toothpick. He glanced toward the Germans, then toward the cup left untouched at every seat. He smirked. "They really think we'd waste good poison on 'em." But the Germans weren't smiling. This wasn't about poison. It was about pride. To accept something soft, something sweet, from your captors, it was a small act. But in its smallness, it carried weight. For men trained to endure cold, mud, hunger, and humiliation, sweetness felt like surrender. It whispered something dangerous. You are safe now. But safe wasn't something they believed in. Not here, Not now. The sound of boots against the floor faded as they were dismissed to their barracks. No one finished their meal. The ice cream remained, slowly softening in the cups, untouched. As Dietrich stepped outside, the wind tugged at his collar, dry and unkind. A small boy rode by on a rusted bicycle just beyond the wire fence, laughing as he raced the dust. No guards yelled, no dogs barked. The world didn't seem to notice 43 former soldiers arriving with nothing left but pride and names on a clipboard. Inside the mess hall, a janitor began clearing the trays, shaking his head as he scraped the ice cream into a gray bucket. Back in the barracks, Dietrich sat on the edge of his cot, unrolling his blanket with methodical care. He didn't speak, but his eyes lingered on the creases. He folded, unfolded, folded again. In the corner, a chessboard sat unused. The radio played soft American jazz in another room, but it might as well have been artillery for how alien it felt. Later that night, one of the guards passing by Barrack 8A paused and peeked in. "They haven't touched their dessert," he remarked to another. "Don't blame 'em," the second said. "Heard they think we're seducing them." The first guard laughed quietly. "Maybe we are." In the silence that followed, the prisoners lay still in their bunks, each man staring at the ceiling, at the floor, at anything but each other. The light from the hallway cast long shadows through the slats. No one spoke of the dessert again that night, but its presence lingered, like a question unanswered, like warmth unclaimed. They marched in chained by pride, not shackles. The churn handle jammed halfway through its turn, groaning in protest. Private Leonard Boone wiped the back of his wrist across his brow and leaned into the crank again, muscles taut, knuckles white. The tin canister rattled inside the makeshift icebox, sloshing with half-frozen cream and powdered milk. Behind him, the stench of boiled cabbage and powdered eggs lingered in the humid kitchen air. "Again, with this thing?" Corporal Delman muttered from across the galley, lifting a tray stacked with dented tins. "That ain't what they trained us for." Leonard didn't answer. He focused on the slow resistance of the churn, its metallic cough echoing through the cramped kitchen. A trickle of ammonia hissed behind him, snaking through cold coils that lined the back freezer, one of the few luxuries salvaged from Red Cross overstock. Cold fog seeped along the floor like breath in winter. The door creaked open. Sergeant Langley stepped in, boots clicking on the tile. "Boone," he barked, "you're behind rotation." "What's going bad?" "Condensed milk and cream, sir," Leonard replied, still churning. "Eggs, too." Langley scowled. "Red Cross flagged us again. They don't like seeing crates sit too long. Says we're hoarding. We're not. It's just, they're not eating it," Boone muttered. He didn't mean to sound frustrated, but the truth scratched at his throat like dry bread. "The Germans." "They won't touch the cold stuff," Langley exhaled through his nose. "They're not our problem. Get it served or get it scrapped. That's the order." As the sergeant turned to leave, Leonard hesitated. "Sir, why not give them something familiar? Bread or stew. Something real." Langley stopped at the threshold. He didn't turn around. They wouldn't understand. The door closed with a final clack. Leonard's hands returned to the churn. He could still feel the cold in his bones, deeper than the metal. It wasn't just a culinary experiment anymore. It was principle, decency, a way to make something close to home, even if home was thousands of miles behind him in Indiana, where his mother used to spin fresh cream with her bare arms in the old wooden barrel. Saturday mornings, raspberry syrup, porch steps slick with morning dew. He was trying to bring a sliver of that to this place, even if no one wanted it. The mess hall was a converted barn with corrugated tin siding and high rafters that echoed every clatter. Long tables stretched across the room, worn smooth by months of elbows and hollow glances. On this particular afternoon, the kitchen staff wheeled out a low cart carrying tin bowls of the frozen mixture. Chalky white and dense, more slush than scoop. No flavors, just condensed milk, cream, a hint of sugar. Leonard had added the sugar from his personal rations. The German prisoners filed in silently, boots clicking, faces unreadable. Most were lean and sun-reddened from days in the fields. Some had fresh calluses. All wore the same gray uniforms, patched and stiff, like the suspicion in their eyes. Dietrich Voss sat near the end of the table, arms folded. He eyed the bowl in front of him like it was a ticking device. "It's back," muttered the man beside him, Johann, his bunkmate from Kiel. "The cold paste." "They call it ice cream," Dietrich replied flatly. Johann scoffed. "This isn't ice. It isn't cream." A third man leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for the others to hear. "I heard it's chemical. They're testing our tolerance." Like rats, laughter rippled through the group, but it was nervous, not genuine. No one touched the bowls. From a window slot above the kitchen, Leonard watched. His sleeves were rolled, his hands still red from the crank. His heart dropped a little with each untouched spoon. His friend, a red-haired G I named Hank, walked by with a tray of fresh cornbread for the officers. "They ain't gonna eat it," Hank said, not unkindly. "You're wasting your time." Leonard didn't answer. Instead, he moved back to the freezer and opened the door. The cold hit his face like a slap. Inside sat 4 more canisters, untouched, perfect. He had tried. He really had. That evening, the barracks buzzed with whispers. The prisoners sat on bunks made of creaking metal, the smell of sweat and dry wool thick in the air. One man passed around a tattered letter from home. Another stitched a missing button. Dietrich scribbled on a folded paper with a blunt pencil, his brow furrowed. The bowl of uneaten ice cream still sat beside him, now melted into white soup. "They feed us soap," someone murmured. "It's bait," another replied. He didn't speak, but he kept writing. The next morning, a new crate arrived from the supply train. More powdered eggs, more milk, more responsibility. Boone stood over the inventory sheet, jaw clenched. He knew what was coming. Another order from Langley. Another mandate to use or lose. The head cook, Staff Sergeant Myers, strolled in with a half-burned cigarette stuck to his lower lip. "You're gonna churn again, Boone?" Leonard nodded, though the knot in his stomach said otherwise. Myers shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just don't expect applause." As the icebox hummed to life, Leonard set the bowl in place, poured the mixture, and began to turn. The churn resisted again. He grunted and leaned his weight into it, sweat already starting to bead. Outside, the sun pressed down on the camp like a lid on a boiling pot. That afternoon, Red Cross inspectors walked through the facility with clipboards and narrowed eyes. One paused near the kitchen storage and tapped the inventory sheet with a pen. "You're not rotating the milk fast enough," he said. Leonard raised a hand. "I'm working on it, sir." "The product isn't spoiled, just misunderstood." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Misunderstood?" Leonard hesitated. "They think it's poison." "Or a trick." The inspector made a note, his expression unchanged. "If the inventory spoils, it's non-compliance. Serve it or dispose of it." No sentiment, and that was that. Back in the barracks, Dietrich read a new letter from his sister. The words blurred slightly. She'd written about their bakery in Hamburg, about how the ovens had gone cold, how she missed their father's rye. He looked again at the bowl. Cold, white, harmless, but his jaw stayed clenched. Boone sat alone in the mess after lights out, the churn beside him. He dipped a spoon into the newest batch and brought it to his lips. The taste was simple, almost bland, but it was real. It was something. It reminded him of a place where things made sense. He glanced at the untouched rows of bowls on the serving counter. What they were given as kindness was mistaken for camouflage. The first spoon fell with a soft clink onto the wooden floorboards. Dr. Merton Weiss looked up from his cot, where he had been scribbling into a small leather-bound journal. The sound came from the mess hall down the corridor. A tin spoon dropped mid-meal. A murmur followed, Not loud, but enough for Weiss to sigh quietly and close the diary with a gentle snap. He found Dietrich Voss at the center of it. Again. The corporal stood stiffly at the long bench, arms folded, glaring down at his untouched bowl. The pale, glossy substance inside reflected the overhead bulb, its glow warping in the slightly melted surface. Other prisoners watched him carefully, their own bowls untouched as well. The American guards leaned along the wall, arms crossed, one tapping a baton softly against his boot. "Dietrich," Weiss said calmly, stepping closer, "they're offering dessert." "It's a gesture." Dietrich didn't flinch. "It's bait," he muttered. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Weiss tried to diffuse the tension. "It's not poisoned. How would you know?" "I've read the cartons myself," Weiss said. "Condensed milk, powdered cream, salt, ice." Vanilla Dietrich's lip curled. "Chemistry." Merton sighed, motioning to the bowl. "Not chemicals. Ingredients around the room." Others returned to their seats, still watching. No one ate. Later that night, Weiss sat alone by the barracks' single window. The Nebraska dusk stretched long and quiet across the prairie, cicadas humming in the grass beyond the wire fences. He opened his journal and wrote, "The Americans extend decency not as dominance, but as discipline. Their offers of comfort are not traps, but our men refuse them all the same. Suspicion has rotted deeper than hunger." The door creaked behind him. It was Private Boone, the young American in charge of kitchen duty. He lingered awkwardly by the threshold, cap in hand. "They didn't touch it again," Boone said. "I noticed," Weiss replied. Boone frowned. "It's real ice cream." "I made it myself this time. No surplus stuff." Churned it by hand, Weiss looked at him with tired eyes. "I believe you." Boone hesitated, then asked, "Why won't they even try it?" Weiss turned back to his journal. "Because what you see as kindness, they see as surrender." Boone blinked. "It's just dessert." "To you. To them, it's softness. And softness, even in sweetness, tastes like losing." Boone opened his mouth, then closed it again and left without another word. That Saturday, the camp projector came to life in the recreation barrack. Folding chairs scraped across the floor as guards arranged the space. A reel labeled Yankee Doodle Dandy spun into motion, flickering against the hanging sheet at the front. The room dimmed, and the upbeat horns of American patriotism filled the air. The Germans sat silently. Weiss observed from the back, arms crossed. He noted how every man kept his hands folded, no one reaching for the complimentary popcorn or the small cups of vanilla ice cream laid beside them. Their faces were blank, but the silence was thick, not with boredom, but defiance. As the black and white musical played, the American guards stood relaxed against the wall. One of them, Dalton, an older soldier with tired eyes and a clipped Boston accent, leaned toward another and muttered, "Funny how they'd rather starve than smile." Weiss heard it. He didn't respond. Back in Barricade A that night, Weiss picked up his pen again. They sat through the film like stone. Not one smile, not one bite. The symbolism of ice cream lingers, not as dessert, but as declaration. The war is not only in rifles and skies, it is in every spoon left untouched. He paused, rubbing at the corner of his eye. Earlier, Dietrich had pulled him aside and said something that still echoed in his thoughts. Frozen softness is softness still. It was more than sarcasm, it was theology. To men who were taught that pride was steel and submission a sin, even cream could feel like capitulation. Weiss folded his hands and stared at the tin cup of untouched ice cream he had brought back with him. It had melted completely now, just a pool of lukewarm milk in the flickering lamplight. He didn't eat it either. Trust was colder than the dessert they wouldn't touch. The spoon paused just inches from his lips. Corporal Dietrich Voss sat stone still beneath the canvas canopy, sweat soaking the collar of his shirt, eyes locked on the American who just helped himself to his untouched bowl. The cloying heat of late July hung over Camp G-24 like a wet sheet, wringing tempers and patience from both guards and prisoners alike. Flies buzzed lazily around half-eaten bread and bowls of something cold and pale, glistening beneath syrupy yellow peaches. Private Leonard Boone stood in front of him, a spoon in hand, his face flushed from the heat and nerves. He swallowed theatrically and let out a low, satisfied hum. "Tastes like Saturday morning," Boone said with a boyish grin, tapping the edge of the metal bowl with his spoon. "My ma used to give us peach ice cream when we finished yard chores." The words hung between them, awkward and absurd. Dietrich didn't speak. Around him, several other POWs sat stiffly, their own bowls of melting ice cream untouched, eyes flicking between Boone and the German corporal. Suspicion still lingered thick as the air, days of it, months of it. To many of them, this ice cream was just another trick, a sugary sheath to cover a blade. Boone didn't leave. He just stood there, the same way he had stood behind counters in his family's dairy shop back in Iowa, trying to sell sour milk with a smile and not blink when the customer sniffed it. Dietrich's hand moved, slowly, as if defying something unseen. He dipped his spoon into the bowl. A sliver of vanilla and peach clung to the edge like a dare. One of the men beside him, Klaus, hissed under his breath in German, "Don't." But Dietrich didn't look away. He brought the spoon to his mouth. The cold hit first, unexpected and sharp, sending a brief shiver through his front teeth. Then came the taste. Not soap, not chemicals, not bait, but cream, sweet and oddly clean, followed by a bright burst of syruped peach. He blinked. His tongue rolled the flavor once, twice, as if trying to catch the trick in it. But there was none. Only a memory he hadn't expected to recall, a bakery in Hamburg, years ago, the way a young boy's mouth curved when licking sugar from the edge of a spatula. Across from him, Boone gave a small nod, eyes cautious but hopeful. A low chuckle, dry and brief, escaped Dietrich's throat. "What is it?" Klaus asked sharply. Dietrich didn't answer. He took another spoonful. From across the yard, Major Harold Greaves watched the scene unfold. Standing just outside the command post, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows, he leaned against the frame with arms folded, squinting past the glare of sun off tin bowls. He had not expected much when he'd ordered "Comfort Day." The phrase itself felt like a contradiction inside a barbed wire compound. But maybe, he thought, contradiction was the point. Boone returned to the kitchen, his pulse still jittery. He didn't say a word to the others as he passed, but they saw his face, saw something crack open that had been hard for months. In the shade of the mess tent, something small and invisible shifted. A fly landed on Dietrich's wrist as he ate. He didn't swat it away. 2 tables over, another German prisoner hesitated, then tasted the fruit off the top of his bowl. Others followed, some slowly, others with curiosity masked in scowls. None of them smiled, not yet, but the silence had changed. Inside Barricade A, Dr. Merton Weiss paused in the middle of his journal entry. He had seen Boone's gesture. He had seen Voss eat. He turned the page and wrote only one line. The first weapon to fail was not a gun, but distrust. Back under the canopy, the canvas flapped in the wind, drawing more guards' attention. One of them, Sergeant Malley, walked over to Boone near the kitchen, eyeing the yard cautiously. "Is that Kraut eating it?" he asked, jerking his chin toward Dietrich. Boone nodded. Malley grunted. "Well, I'll be." But Boone didn't respond. He was watching Dietrich, not out of triumph, but something deeper, like watching a long winter thaw by one drop. By the time the bowls were collected, most were empty. Dietrich handed his back without a word, but the guard who took it noticed something peculiar. He had wiped it clean with a crust of bread. Not for hunger, for something else. When the heat finally broke 3 days later with a late summer storm, ice cream was served again. No announcement, no protocol. It didn't need one, and no one questioned it. Not the guards, not the prisoners, not even Dietrich. In a war of weapons and words, it was silence that signaled defeat. The clang of the kitchen freezer door echoed like a gunshot in the quiet camp morning. Private Leonard Boone winced as it shut behind him, cradling a tin of rapidly softening vanilla ice cream under one arm. The July sun was already high, and the ammonia coils were barely keeping up with the demand. Sweat gathered on his neck and under his helmet strap. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, then looked up to find Corporal Dietrich Voss already waiting at the mess hall door, arms crossed, brow furrowed, eyes flicking toward the tin. Boone offered a nod, not overly friendly, just enough to acknowledge the man's presence. "Another batch," he said, setting the tin down on a prep table. "No soap this time." Dietrich didn't smile. He didn't need to. His silence had changed over the past week, from stiff rejection to something resembling quiet interest. He walked over, inspected the tin, and then, without waiting for permission, dipped a spoon from the rack into the edge. He tasted it. His jaw moved. His throat worked. "It's smoother," he said finally, his German accent thick but comprehensible. "Less grainy." Boone folded his arms, leaning on the table. "Used more condensed milk. It's all surplus, but the trick is knowing how long to churn without making it crumble." Dietrich looked at him carefully. "You were not a soldier before." Boone shook his head. "Dairy plant, Nebraska. You?" "Baker, Hamburg." A pause. "Before the tanks." There was a beat of silence between them, just long enough for the ice cream to begin sweating at the edges. Boone motioned toward the utensils. "Want to help?" That's how it started. Two men, enemies by all technical accounts, standing side by side, folding cream into steel, cranking the handles of makeshift churns, measuring powdered sugar by touch and eye. It wasn't about dessert anymore. It was about rhythm, about the simple, silent rituals they both recognized. Later that afternoon, under the canvas shade outside Barrack 4, Boone watched as Dietrich passed bowls to a small group of prisoners. Not a word was spoken, but the motion was gentle, careful. Each bowl was taken with two hands. No laughter, no jokes, just stillness, followed by the sound of spoons scraping gently across metal. From the mess hall window, Dr. Merton Weiss observed with his journal open on his lap. He wrote slowly, thoughtfully, "They do not understand the ice cream. They understand the hands that made it, and they understand that those hands, in some quiet place between ovens and rifles, once knew flour and fire the same way." Across the camp, the shift was subtle but unmistakable. One prisoner named Johannes traded his last Lucky Strike cigarette to a fellow inmate for half a bowl of the chilled dessert. Another, normally stoic, offered to scrub pots in the mess hall just to be near the churn. Boone noticed that one of the guards, Dalton, the same one who once mocked the POWs for refusing popcorn, stood outside the shade that day, watching. He didn't say anything. In Washington, buried inside a stack of wartime reports, a single memo crossed the desk of a young analyst. It read, "Improved conduct in Hastings POW camp. Possible correlation to food morale strategies. No further action recommended." Below it, in black pen, a senior officer scribbled one word, "coincidental." But in the real camp, Camp G24, change wasn't theoretical. It was tactile. Boone handed Dietrich a stained recipe card and watched as the man adjusted the measurements, translating cups to grams, tablespoons to scales. They debated the correct cream temperature. They argued over whether American vanilla was too sweet. And yet, neither walked away. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped gold across the barbed wire fences, Boone sat on a crate, eating from a dented tin bowl. Dietrich joined him. They didn't speak for a while. The breeze carried the scent of sweat and ammonia and peaches. "You know," Boone said eventually, spoon hovering, "the first time you guys saw this stuff, you looked at it like we were trying to trick you." Dietrich didn't respond at first. Then, "We were trained to see kindness as deception." Boone nodded, scooping another mouthful. "And now?" Dietrich looked down at the bowl in his hands. "Now," he said quietly, "we know it isn't poison. But we're still learning if it's peace." That night, Dr. Weiss recorded a final note before sleep overtook him. "Something intangible has shifted. The derision is gone. The shame of being comforted replaced by the dignity of being seen." The next morning, Boone arrived early to the kitchen. Dietrich was already there, sleeves rolled, hands dusted with chalky sugar. They worked in silence, side by side, the cold coils humming behind them. "You can fight the hand that feeds you, but not the one that understands you." The shutter clicked. Laughter froze in silver nitrate as the Red Cross photographer, a gaunt man in wire-rimmed glasses named Harold Metz, lowered his bulky camera and let out a satisfied breath. 5 German POWs sat on the bench beneath the pine-shaded canopy in the center of Camp G24, each holding a dented tin bowl of vanilla ice cream, glistening under the afternoon sun. Their eyes squinted with the kind of joy no guard had seen in months. At the center of the photo, Corporal Dietrich Voss leaned back mid-laugh, mouth wide, spoon lifted as if to toast something invisible. Metz scribbled notes beside his tripod. Date, July 29th. Location, Nebraska. Subject, evidence of moral upkeep and humane engagement. Then he added a line in the margin, quietly, for himself. Laughter doesn't lie. What the photo never caught, what no shutter could, was the moment after the camera stopped watching. A hush drifted across the yard, faint and unexpected. Klaus Bittner, the youngest among the group, no older than 22 and wiry from too many months of powdered soup, placed his spoon into his bowl, wiped his lips, and stood. He didn't ask. He didn't wait for permission. "We are prisoners," he began, his voice unsteady but clear. "Yes, but today we are human." Silence gripped the camp like wind before a storm. Several guards stiffened. One, posted near the entrance of the yard, rested his hand on his holstered sidearm, not out of threat, but instinct. Another glanced toward the observation post where the senior sergeant leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed. Major Harold Greaves, standing with hands clasped behind his back a few paces away, did not move. His Yale ring caught the sunlight. He simply watched. No barked orders came. No discipline. The war, after all, was still ongoing, far from over in Berlin, far from still in the Pacific. But something about that moment defied orders. Something about that sentence, spoken in broken English by a German boy with frost still clinging to his bowl, rang truer than any speech a commander could make. Klaus sat down quietly. He didn't smile. He looked down into the melting cream. Dietrich placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Nothing said, just weight, warmth, and agreement. Across the camp, Private Leonard Boone stood beside the makeshift serving table, still holding an empty tin scoop. His apron was stained with cream and sweat. He hadn't moved since the boy spoke. A few moments later, he walked slowly back to the staff hut, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. As he passed the outer fence, one of the guards, Dalton, tall and silent, nodded once. Inside the hut, Boone sat alone on a wooden crate, holding the scoop in both hands. He stared at it like it held answers. He'd churned every batch himself, hand-cranked the ammonia compressor, added the peaches when Commandant Greaves authorized the Comfort Day. But he hadn't expected this. Back outside, the ice cream began to melt faster in the summer heat. The 5 prisoners sat in silence now. A cicada chirred in the trees above. Far off, a freight train bellowed across the Nebraska plain, and then all was still. 3 months later, the war ended. The wire fences came down. The signs were taken off the barracks. Camp G24 was scheduled for decommissioning. Most of the prisoners were quietly repatriated. No fanfare, just orders and movement. Dietrich didn't speak much during the departure. He shook Boone's hand once, firmly, and nodded. "Thank you for how you did things," he said. That was all. Boone didn't expect anything more, but in December, after the first snow dusted the fields outside Hastings, a plain brown envelope arrived at Boone's family home, addressed in careful script, to Mr. Leonard Boone. Inside was a single postcard. The image on its front was a hand-drawn sketch of a bakery storefront. The sign read, Voss Bäckerei, Hamburg. Inside, behind a window pane, two figures were visible, one young, one older, each wearing aprons. On the back, in neat German-accented English, was a short note. Dear Boone, we now serve ice cream of Kriegsbrot, ice cream on wartime bread. Recipe enclosed. No chemicals, I promise. Thank you for the quiet decency. Yours, Dietrich Boone smiled, slowly, then looked at the enclosed recipe. It was scribbled on waxy paper, folded twice. His mother would have laughed. Powdered milk, cornstarch, a dash of salt, canned peaches, and stale rye bread. But Boone saw more than ingredients. He saw memory, connection, a moment that didn't make headlines but rewrote something deeper. The photo Metz had taken would later find its way into a dusty folder in the National Archives. It would be labeled POW Camp Morale Documentation, 1945. No one would ever know what followed the laugh, the spoon, the words spoken by Klaus Bittner. No historian would record that 5 men learned how sweetness could feel like freedom, even in captivity. But Boone would remember. He'd remember the spoon raised like a toast, the way Dietrich's eyes creased when he laughed, the strange silence that followed a simple truth, the way ice cream, in that summer heat, melted not just in bowls, but through fear, through pride, through distance. The war ended with documents and treaties, but for some, it ended with a spoon. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights themes of culture, curiosity, and the unexpected warmth of humanity during times of division. Its purpose is to inspire reflection on understanding, shared joy, and how small acts can melt even the coldest barriers between people.